to be able to record all the exposures of an institution on a blockchain, which regulators could see in real time, could have been transformational at the moment of a crisis. And it really seared in my mind why this technology could have a role in preventing a future crisis of that nature. But it could be so much more. I mean, it could change the nature of payments, change the nature of marketplaces, to move settlement systems that we've become accustomed to 2 and 3 days down to instantaneous. The Bitcoin was actually created the same year as the financial crisis. Out of that crisis, I think, is going to be the seeds of a new financial infrastructure of the future.
Yeah.
There's a new paradigm coming, and the seeds of it are around us right now.
Yeah. And because we are so excited to announce you to our advisory board today. Thank you so much for your support, for your leadership. It's really an honor to have you here. You were such a great leader for us in government, working with you for many years while you're the chairman of the CFTC. Was an amazing experience, and I hope there will be many others that follow in your footsteps that are as supportive and forward-thinking of new technologies like blockchain. While you were the chairman of the CFTC, you were known as a blockchain champion. While you were there, the Lab CFTC was started, which did a lot of great work to advance blockchain and fintech thinking more broadly across the agency. What is it about blockchain that drew you to this technology? What is it that went off in your mind that made you want to be the supporter and the leader that you are today?
Well, thank you very much. Those are very kind words. Look, I've always been fascinated by the ability of technology to transform business practices, whether it be markets or otherwise. And throughout my career, I've helped build one of the first electronic trading platforms for over-the-counter derivatives back in 15 years ago in New York, and in other areas have worked with technology. So I've always been fascinated. But the experience that really seared the opportunity for blockchain in my memory actually goes back to the financial crisis, when central bankers were calling brokers like mine to find out what was going on in markets. They were concerned about the amount of credit default swap written against major financial institutions, major banks, and yet they had no way of quantifying the exact exposure. They thought at the time of the financial crisis that the amount of exposure that Lehman was subject to was $400 billion in outstanding notional amount. What they didn't know, what we now know, the actual amount was less than $9 billion. The difference between $400 billion and $9 billion in 2008 could have been the difference between what we got, which was a TARP program that was large and untargeted, or a very targeted rescue of one institution. Rescue or not, at least a policy choice could have been there to make a targeted response that could have changed. So the ability to be able to record all the exposures of an institution on a blockchain, which regulators could see in real time, could have been transformational at the moment of a crisis. And it really seared in my mind why this technology could have a role in preventing a future crisis of that nature. But it could be so much more. I mean, it could change the nature of payments, change the nature of marketplaces, to move settlement systems that we've become accustomed to 2 and 3 days down to instantaneous change. I mean, it's a power is extraordinary, and I feel this is one of the most exciting times to be in markets, to be in finance. I think we're going to look back 15 years from now and realize this was a turning point in the technological, the ability of markets to adopt this really fundamental technological transformation, and I'm excited to be part of it.
Yeah, I mean, I love that that's kind of your perspective. As someone who grew up in Florida, I was studying economics at the University of Florida during the global financial crisis. And the financial crisis, in some respects, was the bursting of the housing bubble. And the housing bubble was basically the state of Florida. And pretty much everyone I knew what was impacted by what was happening. And as a student, I really wanted to understand what was actually happening, and I really challenged myself to just dig deep and to understand and to learn and to ask hard questions. And what came out of that learning was quite frightening and upsetting.
That's fascinating, because I think people don't fully understand. We understand the financial crisis as a financial crisis. I don't think we've fully gotten our mind around the impact of the financial crisis as a psychological impact. And I think one of the interests in cryptocurrencies and digital assets is by a generation that lost faith in the institutions that had served us up and through the financial crisis. And they seek to, in a sense, move off that traditional set of rails and institutions into a more pure, if you will, environment. And so I think the psychological impact of the crisis lingers today, and as important as the economic impact of that crisis. And I think it is the seeds. It's an interesting coincidence that Bitcoin was actually created the same year as the financial crisis. Out of that crisis, I think, is going to be the seeds of a new financial infrastructure of the future.
Yeah, I mean, this year is the 75th anniversary of the Bretton Woods Agreement, and just looking back at how much the international financial and monetary system has evolved in 75 years, we agreed to this international gold standard, and where we are today is so radically different. And then today, where you have these advanced technologies like blockchain, like AI, like the internet, you can just imagine how much more radically transformed our systems are going to be.
Absolutely. There's a new paradigm coming, and the seeds of it are around us right now.
Yeah. And of course, government plays a huge role
Yes.
in that. The blockchain space, the crypto space has a lot of policy and regulatory challenges. What do you see as the biggest issue for the blockchain space? And what is the issue if they don't get it right is going to?
Yeah. So actually, my experience in the last 5 years serving as a commissioner and then chairman of the U.S. Commodity Futures Trading Commission really informs a lot of my view of the right role of government. I mean, I think government, its role is not to be first, but certainly not to be last, and it has to be permeable to these innovations. It has to focus on what I call market intelligence. Regulators need to understand these innovations and evolutions, need to look upon markets as long-term, but always changing through the latest technological innovation, and that the goal of regulation is not to endorse any technological paradigm, but to remain open to the changing in those technological paradigms over time. And so it's so important for regulators to be where innovators are talking and meeting, and to be understanding the impact of that. And so a close relationship between the regulators and the regulated community and the technological innovators is critical.
Yeah, absolutely. And given your experience in the CFTC and now and graduating into the next phase of your career, how are you taking your experience at the CFTC and applying it to the next steps of how you're going to work in this space?
Knowing how regulators operate, what I think I can bring to bear for policymakers is to think about what is the best role for regulators in this new innovation. I mean, the leaders I spoke to at the commission and continue to speak to, are focused on how do we best accommodate this new innovation, and I think I've got something to say, having experienced this myself in the commission, how best to accommodate this. And that's something that, with the help of the U.S. Chamber, I'll be able to speak to policymakers about where do we go in terms of finding the right balance of regulation and innovation.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's that risk of inaction that poses such a huge challenge. If we're not able to understand it, if we're not able to take the right steps to address this new technology, we as a community, as a nation, as an industry, we'll have a lot to lose.
You know, I used to have a boss who would say, the wrong action is regrettable, but no action is inexcusable.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thank you so much.
My pleasure.
We're pleased to welcome you to the advisory board and look forward to working with you on these issues.
Let's have some fun.
Yeah.
To be able to record all the exposures of an institution on a blockchain, which regulators could see in real time, could have been transformational at the moment of a crisis. And it really seared in my mind why this technology could have a role in preventing a future crisis of that nature. But it could be so much more. I mean, it could change the nature of payments, change the nature of marketplaces, to move settlement systems that we've become accustomed to 2 and 3 days down to instantaneous. The Bitcoin was actually created the same year as the financial crisis. Out of that crisis, I think, is going to be the seeds of a new financial infrastructure of the future.
Yeah.
There's a new paradigm coming, and the seeds of it are around us right now.
Yeah.